I mean, we are going to start with what is education? What is the goal of education? So we're talking about the philosophy of education. But for me, I'm coming from the perspective of the psychological impact and damage of neocolonialism in education.
But how come, despite all these years, we still are not able to figure out this game? That this game is not designed for us to win. That when we want to study, we need to study things that can help us. I'm talking of the African intellects, people who have studied, who have studied everything. They have the time to be able to study. They have gotten all the degree. How come they still cannot figure this out so that they can help their people to be free from this mental slavery?
Let me say this to you and to everyone listening to us. The imperialists will never see you as equal. Why? It is ingrained in their psyche, and it's also theologically erroneously engaged in their own psyche as well, that they are born to rule. It is coming from a Greek philosophy that the gods have chosen them to rule because they are superior by the virtue of the color of their skin. And therefore, my own challenge is that Africans need to stop looking up for validation. You don't need a human being to validate you.
Thank you for joining us in today's presentation. My name is Obehi Esan, and I help purpose-driven entrepreneurs to own their stories so they can attract the right audience and drive success. I am the author of the Storytelling Mastery, a 5-part book series that takes you by the hands through the ABC of storytelling. If you find that interesting, you can claim the first chapter free at aclasses.org/free chapter. Now, before we start in today's presentation, let me quickly introduce you to our signature program, Own Your Story, a 5-step transformative journey to reshape your professional and business narrative for success in less than 19 days. And it's available at academy.aclasses.org/story. If you feel that as an entrepreneur, you want to make your competition irrelevant by leveraging the power of your story, then take action. The program is currently available at a pre-launch of 50% discount from the original price. That offer is not going to be available for long, so take action now if you are interested in owning your story and using it to attract the right audience so you can serve them in line with your mission and key purpose in life. Now back to today's presentation. Join us for this presentation, which we are going to be talking about the educational curriculum and neocolonialism. And of course, we are looking at the demography that we are always concentrating on, which is the African people and the African diaspora. So Professor Oluwafemi is going to be helping us to understand these dynamics today. So how we are going to go about it is we're going to listen to a full lecture from Professor Oluwafemi. After that, we're going to do a Q&A session to help us understand this even more. So, Professor Oluwafemi, could you please tell the people who you are to start with and then go on with your full lecture? Please go ahead.
Thank you for this great opportunity. My name is Oluwafemi Esan. I'm a professor of transpersonal psychology and education, and also professor of biblical psychology. I'm a consultant in teacher training and development. I'm also the founder of Elroy London Academy and also the vice chancellor of Elroy London University. Thank you. So today, we are going to look at a very interesting and very important aspect of our education in the third world. Why are we getting involved in this? is because we are looking at a very important aspect of the educational life in the third world. And we are looking at the very ideology of educational neocolonialism, educational neocolonialism. And our subtitle is Understanding Intellectual Neocolonialism in the Third World. And so we are going to start with certain concepts to be explained. For example, we want to look at colonialism and neocolonialism. Now, as we all know about colonialism, colonialism is the practice of a powerful nation seeking to extend its authority by conquering other countries or establishing settlements and controlling their population and resources. And so we can see from here that the third world has been colonized. And so we know we have the experience of many years of colonization that has taken place in the third world. Now, this domination can be through direct territorial acquisition or by establishing economic and political control over the colonized area. So in other words, in the past years before independence, most of the countries in the third world have experienced colonialism from the imperial powers. And then after we are given independence, the new form of colonialism is the new colonialism that is happening right now at the post-independent era. So we have neocolonialism, which refers to the practice by which powerful countries indirectly maintain or extend their influence over less powerful countries, often through economic, political, or cultural pressures. Now, unlike colonialism, neocolonialism does not involve direct political control or territorial acquisition. So you can see the difference between colonialism and neocolonialism now. Colonialism is a direct territorial control. They come to your land, they control you, they are there with military force, they are occupying your land. But after the post-independent era, the imperialists they have not left us. What they did now is, what they practice now is neo-colonialism, which is an indirect, very subtle. They maintain and extend their influence over colonized former colonies. How do they do that? They are involved in putting pressures in terms of disguise of economic support and aids. And so they do that through economic, political, and cultural pressures. However, they are not there physically, but they are extending their influence. So what we're experiencing in the third world, in the post-independent era in the third world, is now neo-colonialism. And that is what we're experiencing now. And so for us in the academic field, we are looking at educational neocolonialism today. How does this affect our intellectual life? So we can see. So the first thing that we look for now is to look at what is educational neocolonialism. Now, educational neocolonialism, we can talk about this influence is frequently referred to as the concept of educational neocolonialism, in the sense that Western paradigms, tend to shape and influence educational systems and the thinking elsewhere through the process of globalization. And so educational neocolonialism is under the disguise of globalization now. You see that? So globalization is now the vehicle through whereby our educational system is being colonized even after the post-independent era. So we now see that what is happening right in the third world, in the former colonies of this imperialist power, is the fact that they are able to shape our educational system and also our thinking, under the guise of globalization. Now, given this perceived pressure to modernize and reform in order to attain high international standard. And so they come with, we have to globalize, and the world is becoming a global village under that disguise, and they come with that standard that, okay, you have to live up to this standard, and not only that, they even left us with the structures of our educational system that they left us after independence. And so the former colonies are still practicing the structural framework in terms of the curriculum that is involved, and even the management structure that was left by the colonial power. Is it being followed? Is it being followed by the former colonies? And so, under the perceived pressure to modernize and reform in order to attain a high standard, educational policy makers in a non-Western countries tend to look to the West. They look up to the colonial masters. They look up to the imperialists to match their so-called standard, whereby in that process, they completely obliterate our indigenous epistemology and our indigenous ontologies, and then also our indigenous curriculum and way of knowing is completely ignored in order to meet the so-called international standard from the imperialists. So thus they may borrow policies and practices that were originally developed and operated, and which appear to be effective in a very different cultural context to that of their own society, making reference to the former colonies. So the former colonies now adopt dogmatically the policies and the systems from the imperialists, disregarding their own cultural context of their own society. And so again, and that leads us to the mentality that if it is not white, it is not right, even in our educational system. So again, we see that imperialism is also happening to the colonized educational system in the third world. Now, what is imperialism? Imperialism occurs when a nation seeks to extend its influence beyond its borders, primarily through diplomatic or indirect means. It is driven by the ambition to control resources, trade routes, and strategic territories without direct governance. So we see that imperialism has also encroached the educational system of the third world. While it might not always result in colonization, it always seeks dominance over other regions or people. So we now see educational imperialism taking place now in the 21st century again. So you can see that, they are not there in their physically present, but they always seek dominance. And that has been the story of the third world educational system now. So we see the imperialist educational colonization taking place. We see neocolonizing taking place in our educational system, and with the imperialist power taking the dominant, and they do it subtly, indirectly, and that is what is really happening. And how does this look like? In the sense. So there's some statistics here that shows to us the serious thing we're talking about when we're talking about educational neocolonialism and educational imperialism that is taking place in the former colonies of the imperialist power. In 1914, it is said that more than 90% of the Earth's surface was occupied. What's this? Control or shape by Euro-American powers and Imperial Japan. This is fundamental to understanding modern higher education and international higher education. Now, if you look at it, in 1914, more than 90% of the Earth's surface were under imperialist powers. So you can now see, again, this is what set the precedents and set the foundation for imperialist educational system and also neocolonialism. Because by 1914, you can see that just in the earliest years of the 19th century, you can see that if the 90% of the heart was occupied by imperialists, that has a great influence on the way of life of the people and also the foundation of modern higher education and international education in these lands that were former colonies of the imperialist power. Having said that, in 1997, Abbott wrote a wonderful article called The Servitude of the Mind, The Servitude of the Mind, Education, Dependency, and Neocolonialism. Now, what imperialist educational philosophy is doing now, they are not occupying your land physically, but they are occupying your mind. They are occupying your mind. And in the process of doing that, they are controlling your life in the third world. And so our educational system, as you can see, in the colonial period, according to Abba, it says indigenous cultures, in many cases highly developed, were virtually ignored by colonial educational policy. You'll see that. Our indigenous psychology, our indigenous epistemology, our indigenous ontologies, also our indigenous curriculum were completely ignored by the colonial educational policy. After the and this impeded the creation of national consciousness in the former colonies. So again, we now see what is taking place in educational neocolonialism. What is taking place now in educational imperialism is the fact that our intellectual life is not colonized, and that is a danger of neocolonialism in the educational system. In 1971, Albert, in his paper titled Education and Neocolonialism, explains how Western powers sustained themselves in their former colonies through the shaping of education and intellectual life. This is a new norm that the imperialist power, in a subtle manner, are controlling the intellectual and educational life of former colonies. And this has led to psychological dependency on them. And so they have encroached the most subtle, the most powerful aspect of human, the mind, through education and our intellectual life. And so this continued. Now, Albert went further, discusses how English and French has been the language of instruction in former colony, the Anglophone, Francophone. He also said, West subsidized textbook scholarship that brings students to the new imperial center and focus their attention on the international scholar community, not their own. You see that? Subsidized institutions that are clones of foreign models and Western teachers and advisors. So in terms of student exchange, giving scholarship, bringing the students from the former colonies to the imperialist center. How do they do that? They give us such aids, such scholarship arrangement. But what they expose our students to is their ways of knowing, is the Eurocentric curriculum that have shaped the mindset of these people to ignore and to completely neglect their indigenous culture. And so this has continued over the years. And this is how even the most intellectual people among us are already colonized in their mind. Research on emerging countries is mostly done by Western scholars who treat those countries merely as mines for data. Local scholars should also play a larger role, according to Albert. So we see that they use us for their data, they use us for gathering information regardless of what is happening. Again, Albert went further to say educational assistance is generally linked to an underlying political or ideological tenet. So in the name of educational assistance, in the name of foreign aids to education, there's an undertone, there's an agenda, there's a hidden motive, because there's a political and ideological tenet behind the assistance. It concludes by calling for equity, an end to Western domination, and recognition of global interdependence. Now, as he said that, it is very important for us to know that the way forward from this neocolonialism that we are experiencing today is to understand the importance of indigenization and contextualization of the curriculum. Over the years, the imperialist power have colonized our curriculum through educational neocolonialism, through educational imperialism, shaping our educational philosophy, shaping our educational system, shaping our curriculum development. And that's where we are today. And these are negative impact on our mindset. Highly intellectual people, but colonizing their thinking. And therefore, our indigenous psychology, indigenous identity has been eroded by the intellectual colonization of the imperialist power. And therefore, the way forward from this is indigenization and contextualization of the curriculum. What is indigenization? Indigenization focuses on embedding indigenous perspective into curriculum. Contextualization considers national, regional, and cultural background in curriculum development. By indigenizing the curriculum, educators can now honor the cultural heritage of indigenous communities, promote social and environmental sustainability, and also foster cultural proficiency among students and teachers alike. And this is the consciousness that we need to emancipate our intellectual life from colonized powers. The need for the educational system to adapt and evolve by integrating indigenous perspectives, practices, and ways of knowing into teacher education programs and school curricula, ultimately bridging the gap between formal education and indigenous wisdom for a more effective and inclusive learning experience. So the way forward to be emancipated from educational neocolonialism and educational imperialism is indigenization and contextualization of the curriculum. And that is where the journey begins. We have to create this awareness. And in doing this, it helps the teachers and the students to comprehend concepts by relating and presenting lessons on the context of prevailing local environment, culture, and resources. Indigenizing curriculum is about transforming curriculum and teaching practice to include indigenous knowledge. For example, a tip for creating contextualized lesson plan using identity real-life connection. Look for ways to connect the new information to real-life situation or prior knowledge that students can relate to. Use authentic materials. Incorporate real-world example, text, or resources that are relevant to the topic being taught. In other words, the journey begins with our teacher education to begin the process of decolonization and the process of decolonization of educational imperialism and educational neocolonialism is to begin the journey of indigenization and contextualization of the curriculum. And the agent of change that is needed here is our teachers. So you have to first to decolonize the teacher education curriculum. Thank you.
I appreciate this full lecture. I appreciate it. There is a lot of value here, and there are a lot of things that we need to unpack to help people understand what we are talking about here. Actually, I deduce a lot of information from your lecture, and I think, of course, I'm going to be asking for clarification because that is what we are here for. Because people that are listening to you, they do have some questions to ask. Of course, those are some of the things that we are going to be responding to. In your presentation, you talked of the fact that the colonialists, the imperialists, haven't really left us. But the question is, do we Africans, do we people that are so-called the former colonies know that the colonialists really haven't left? That is the first question.
Yes. The interesting question you ask. If you look at what Halbert said in his article there, The Servitude of the Mind, it said the imperialists has encroached, they've encroached our education and intellectual life, and therefore they've impeded national consciousness. That is the key there. Majority of the former colonies are unconscious of the fact that our intellectual life and our educational life have been colonized. It is an unconscious thing that happens subtly in the subconscious mind. And that's why that national consciousness for emancipation is not there, because the mind has been encroached. And so it has become a norm for them. And it's also part of their psyche. So this is the problem with this educational neocolonialism, where your mind is colonized, your mind controls your thought and your lens through which you interpret your world.
We have all this situation now where we are almost like a kind of simulation for other people, where we are like little rat just running to and fro according to a game that is designed by other people. We are actually objects in another man's game. We don't yet know.
Absolutely.
We want to win, but we are never going to win in that game. I remember one time I was interviewing a historian of the Jamaica origin, but in the UK, and we were talking about the relationship between African and Europe, or let's say African and the Euro-Western imperialist. Because what Europe did is that as they formed the colony, the new colony or the United States, they basically form a coalition of how they are going to approach Africa. So that the Berlin Conference of the 1800s and the approach, how Europe approached Africa in 2024 is exactly the same. It have never changed. And they don't have any intention of changing that. They have designed a game where everybody needs to play. And of course, you touch in the very many areas, looking at, for example, the globalization, the so-called helping people in education, helping them to get education and all of that. If you are not awakened, you don't understand the danger in those things. It is when you are awakened that you begin to question yourself, but how can you educate people? If education is light, how can you, a dominator, how can you, an exploiter, bring light to the people that you are exploiting? It doesn't make sense.
Exactly.
So the question is, what are the consequences of this sleeping, walking that we are as Africans, or the people that are formerly colony of the European imperialists? What is the danger we run?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, the first psychological damage that educational neocolonialism has done and educational imperialism has done to our people in the third world is our sense of self has been affected. Our self-esteem, our self-worth, and our self-image has been affected negatively, that have resulted in us suffering from low self-esteem with the mentality of looking up to the imperialists in every area of our life. And therefore, we are now importing imperialist solution to our local problem. So we are still psychologically dependent on them, despite the fact of our PhDs and our so-called intellectual people that are trained in the colonized Western education. What is the result? Low self-esteem, low self-concept. Our sense of identity, our sense of self-worth has been battered. And that has led to inferiority complex operating in our mind. That if it is not white, it is not right. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I want to say again that you are the best specimen to be doing this conversation. And of course, I also want to let our audience understand that we are creating a program that you can benefit from. Professor Oluwafemi is collaborating with us, A-Classes. Therefore, his university, the Aero University London with A-Classes, we are developing a program where within 90 days, you will be able to understand how to decolonize yourself, how to use the philosophy and the ideology of transpersonal psychology to rediscover who you are. It's going to take you less than 90 days. With all the experiences that Professor Oluwafemi have garnered, he will dismantle the system for you, and you will be able to find yourself and become who you truly are. That program is coming. If you are interested, you can send me a message or you can contact Professor Oluwafemi. I will tell you how to get started. Probably it's going to be towards the ending of August. this program is going to be available, because we're not here just to waste time. We're not here just to talk because we didn't have anything to do. We are here intentionally. We are here to help you find who you are. It is confusion that we find ourselves. It is a crisis of identity that we find ourselves as African. We need to find a solution. We need to wake up. You see, you are talking of people not being able to understand where they are. Looking at, for example, what you often say, that in education, there are agenda, which also sort of explains the fact that it doesn't make sense that the person who is exploiting you is giving you also the instrument to run away from his exploitation. It doesn't make any sense.
Exactly.
Now, if you take a look at Nigeria, for example, of course, we always go back to Nigeria because that is where we are coming from. We are giving Nigeria a preference here because I am doing that on purpose, intentionally. Now, let's look at one product in the Nigerian economy, crude oil. You see, the Nigerian crude oil is a good example of the relationship between Europe and Africa and the Euro-Western idea and how they perceive Africa. Well, you might not necessarily blame everything on them because we are talking of neocolonialism. We are talking of the playing or the game that is taking place between African and Euro, where Africans are the player, where some Africans are the player working for the European in their agenda. So in line with that, the example I want to give is that the Nigerian crude oil is extracted from in its raw state and it's exported to Europe for refinement and then reported back to Africa. I want to give you another example that is very clear in line with this. I think in 1972, Walter Rodney wrote a book that he titled How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. And he gave a similar example of how, for example, he gave an instance of Abidjan and Accra, which are just two adjacent cities from two adjacent states, which is Ghana and Ivory Coast. What I wrote in 1972 was saying that if you want to take a flight from Abidjan to Accra, which are just two cities very close to each other, you will need to move from Abidjan to Paris, then from Paris to London, and from London down to Accra. That is, if you are moving between these two cities. This is a direct interpretation of what we have today, that our mind is connected to European agenda, to the Western agenda, to the fact that for us to be real, we need to look at this reality through the lenses of the European, through the lenses of the Western agenda of life. Because like you said, if it is not white, it is not real. And this is evident in many other things that is happening to us. I am trying to understand if we are aware of these dynamics, that this is a game, that we are playing in another man's game, that this is not just this is not just normal. What is happening in Africa is not normal. We are in a game that is designed by somebody, by people. Since 1800, they have a perfect understanding of what is happening. But do we have an understanding of what is happening?
That's what I was saying. According to what Abba said in his paper, the servitude of the mind servitude. The goal of that is to impede, national consciousness, and the goal of the imperialists is to destroy your self-esteem through the subtle colonization of your intellectual life. And once the intellectual life is colonized, what do you expect to be the outcome of that? So we now have educational policies from a colonized curriculum affecting the intellectual life and the mind. Don't forget that every exposure to curriculum condition your thinking. I'll say that again. Every exposure to a curriculum condition your thinking. You and me were a product of a curriculum, and that curriculum that you are exposed to from early years has shaped your thinking and your sense of self. That is the danger.
Thank you so much for that. And I would like you to speak on the part of globalization, because this is another topic again that will be very important. The Zambian economist, actually, because it's coming from Zambia, Dabisa Moyo wrote a book where she criticized Western NGO because many Africans believe that to develop Africa, we need European European aid to help us to develop. But this again is contrary to what is actually the real situation. There is no way Western NGO can help to develop Africa. It's never going to happen. That development of Africa will come through Western NGO. They are in 2010, when I was writing my book, an analyst said that because in 2010, I wrote a book that I titled "That Development in Africa, My Hands Are Clean." And I was saying that development should be related to the local people, their local interests, and their local resources. During that time in my research, there were about 30,000 Western NGO operating in Africa. They are bringing about development. But Western NGOs in Africa are like Western missionaries in Africa. And Western missionaries in Africa actually are like the colonialists, in that all of them are working together for the same agenda. Because you cannot have Biden coming to run around in my village, for example, to condition people. They need to do it in another way.
Why should the imperialists be responsible for your own responsibility? That's a question. Now, this is what enslaved savage mind does. A slave is conditioned to look to the master. And in slavery, your life is controlled by the master. He owns you. Therefore, it determines your daily activity. It feeds you. Is that not the same thing that is happening to us? When you look up, why should an imperialist be responsible for my own responsibility? Again, what intellectual colonization does is to raise the spirit of irresponsibility. And that irresponsibility is what you are saying by depending on the foreign aid. Let me shock you. In 2 months ago, I met a group of pastors from a country in Africa. I don't want to mention the name of the country. Do you know, because I live in London, we signed an MOU for them to market our courses, Christian courses. They were sending me bill that they need money to print flyer for marketing. At the same time, they want to get 20% of the sales. Who does that? So you can see how damaged, even within the theological seminary curriculum, our theology, our faith, religion is also colonized. And that has led to a servitude mindset, a dependent mindset, that I look up to you to help me. Yes, that is the psychological trauma of imperialist educational system. That's what it does to your mind. You are looking up. And I said it earlier before, sir. Whoever you look up to for your self-definition will cancel you.
I'm going to give a few seconds for somebody to reflect on that. Because there are a lot of ideology, erroneous ideology floating around. I don't want to link it to anything again, that is taking away our power, connecting it to something else. You see, right from at a certain stage in my life, I begin to be suspicious of some idea. These were some of the idea, in that why should we as African, me, for example, growing up in Esan, south of Nigeria, be looking for my salvation in Europe, looking at a Christian idea, for example, because I was a Catholic in Nigeria. Now I can see that in the hierarchy, the system, the structure, the nearest person to God is in Rome, is in Vatican. So I was asking myself, how could this happen? Why is God so wicked that he need to make me pass through this process? I need to go to him through Vatican. Then I say, if this world is going to end now, everybody need to move close to Vatican, because that is where we are going to see God. Because the Pope is a representative of God on earth. That is how the Catholicism put it, that the Pope is a vicar of Jesus, therefore the representative of God on earth. Because again, we are looking at the reality through the lenses of other people, a program that has been designed to help you, to make you forget who you are and pass through them. But we're not going to go into the nitty-gritty of that again, because if we were to go inside and start deconstructing how the Roman Catholicism is set up, we will see that is basically replicating every other thing that is already there. All of us have access to it. We don't need to pass there to know God, because God is already part of us. Anyway, that is just by the way. Now, the globalization and this so-called help to bring development to Africa. I want you to speak more on this globalization, because you see, many people, anyway, we already said that, no, that it is not normal for us to look up through somebody that have been exploiting you all this while to bring salvation to you. But it is happening because we are responding to the educational system. We have been taught that this is the way it is. But speak to me more about this globalized agenda and how that is actually canceling us. They are canceling us out.
Yeah. So the globalized agenda, when you look at in terms of education, as you have said, I've said in my short lecture there, going by the writing of unpacks there, that the pressure is on the former colonies to enter into the benefit of globalization, but forgetting that the globalization agenda has the control and the influences that is subtle in terms of neglecting your indigenous curriculum. So you want the former colonies to be globalized by meeting up the standard according to whose terms and conditions. Do you see that? So the standard was set from where it is purely Eurocentric, Westernized standard that is based on the Western culture. So now I'm exporting that globalized Western culture to the former colonies. And the former colonies are seeing it, I want to be accepted. For me, what is happening is that we are suffering from approval addiction in our educational system. So you want to be approved by the imperialists. So you now receive the aids and the support and their terms and conditions. Don't forget, every aid has a political agenda. Every aid that you receive from the imperialists has a philosophical agenda, and the agenda is to keep on exporting to you the culture whereby they neglect your indigenous curriculum, your indigenous epistemology, indigenous ontology is completely neglected, as seen as inferior, and therefore you have to globalize by taking up my Western standard, and that is what is happening to us in our educational system in Africa.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. Talking of this globalized agenda, many in Nigeria, for example, will remember the structural adjustment program implemented by IBB administration. And of course, that is linked to the IMF loan at the time. Because all these things now are important when we go to analyze ourselves, because now I'm moving towards what are some of the concrete results of these that are happening to us. Of course, we're talking about idea, but there are concrete evidence of what is happening to us in terms of how this idea translates into the day-to-day life of African people, of the colonized people, and in this case, we are using Nigeria as an example. In that IBB at the time, what is the period that we are talking about? We're talking about the period of around 1991, around those time, no? And 1991, again, if we were to look at it, looking at the global event that was happening, that was when the Gulf War was taking place. Gulf War, meaning that Americans were attacking the Gulf people, no? And these Gulf people are also some of the top producers of oil. What that would translate to, if we were to extend the line of analysis, is that Nigeria, being for the fact that it's not in a war country, it's not in a war situation, meaning that it could produce more oil, meaning that it could make more money. But that is the same time that IBB is telling Nigeria we're good because IMF, I don't know whether the IMF was the one that actually suggested the loan or IBB went to IMF to see that we need loan. And we need more money. We need more money because there is poverty in the lands, no? But the question is this one. What were the conditions for the IMF loan to Nigeria under the IBB administration? But there is something also that happened at the time, that somehow the Nigerian people were aware that there is a danger here. And they opened up the debate, the famous debate, whether Nigeria should take the law or not. And it turns out that Nigeria didn't want to take the law. But the Nigerian administration, or that IBB, wanted the law. So that it come to the famous idea that the public can have their say, but when we have our way, they went and take the law. And that okay, first of all, what are some of the consequences of that law? One of the consequences was that Nigeria should open up its economy. This is part of the global agenda because they want to penetrate the Nigerian economy. But there is nothing wrong in that. Only that we need to understand that if you want to play a game, you need to have the instrument to be able to participate in the game. 1991, and of course, up until this time, the dominant product that Nigeria have to export is oil. If Nigeria were to open up its economy with only one product, Nigeria is going to lose. And of course, we lost, and we are still losing now. Because opening up the economy, having a kind of a level playing field, means that most of the products are subsidized in the United States and in United Kingdom and all other European countries can now enter into the Nigerian market. We have nothing to contribute other than oil and a few other products. Who is going to lose? We lose. But in the agenda, the globalized agenda, the European will also win again. They'll continue to win because we haven't have a foresight of what is behind the contract that we are signing.
You are dealing with a political leadership that is colonial. I said it earlier today. What colonized mindset does to you is to destroy your self-esteem and build in you inferiority complex. So when you are going to the negotiating table, you are not negotiating as equal. There is a power imbalance. There's hierarchy there. And so that power imbalance is affecting your thinking. And so you are looking up to them. So that is the mindset of the political leaders that we have. So then what do you expect to be the decision-making process? It will go on further to enslave the people. And that's why in biblical psychology it said, woe unto a land when your king is a slave. Thank you.
The consequences, I'd like you to speak to what are the danger of neocolonialism, of neo-colonial education to African geopolitical structure and the future that we want to project. I'm asking that question again because it is important that we realize that this is a game. But if we don't understand the game that we are playing, we are never going to win.
Yeah, I mean, we are going to start with what is education? What is the goal of education? So we're talking about the philosophy of education. But for me, I'm coming from the perspective of the psychological impact and damage of neo-colonialism in education. Now, any exposure to any form of education has a psychological impact on your psyche called mental conditioning. And this is very subtle. So what educational neocolonialism does is to condition your mind for you to think inferior to the imperialists. And that inferiority complex is the most dangerous trauma we are suffering in the third world.
Permit me to say this. Let's look at an African somewhere in Lagos, in Imo State, in Edo State, who all his life have had a clear image of who God is. And by God, I'm talking of the image that was created by Europeans only a few hundreds of years ago, would make it clear now that God is actually a white man, most probably an Italian who is sitting in the upstairs of heaven. And his son, Jesus, is very clear who he is. We can see him because we see him so much in the film and also a copies of it in the Bible. This person, this Nigerian, have a clear image of who this God is. Now, when this person now understands this, he becomes a negotiator who is going to study contract between Nigeria and maybe Germany, France, or UK, or Italy. The person is going to be talking with is a European who look exactly like this God that he had known all this while. Is there any way that is going to affect his decision of what he's going to do?
Of course, Ms. Obi, it's coming from a damaged mindset. It's coming from an inferiority complex mindset. That is the danger of educational neocolonialism. You look inferior. You think inferior. Sitting in front of the white man, you are already intimidated. You see him as superior to you. Is that not what is happening in our political leadership? That we keep on groaning with our tails between our legs for aid for them to bail us out. Is it not still happening? Despite the fact of all our PhDs and our exposure to education, you are still inferior. You see a white man, you cannot look a white man straight into his eyeball. You are looking down. We have been damaged in our psyche.
I have a question, actually a curiosity, and it's this.
Mm.
But how come, despite all these years, we still are not able to figure out this game? That this game is not designed for us to win. That when we want to study, we need to study things that can help us. I'm talking of the African intellects, no? People who have studied, who have studied everything. They have the time to be able to study. They have gotten all the degree. How come they still cannot figure this out so that they can help their people to be free from this mental slavery?
And that's what I'm talking about. Intellectual emancipation. Emancipatory knowing, emancipatory learning. Emancipatory knowing and learning is the ability to develop a critical thinking skill to question the status quo. You question it, a questioning mindset. What have you noticed? That our education, colonized education in Africa, what it does, it eliminates critical thinking skills. We don't think critically. We don't critique things. We are dogmatic. And that's what it does. Because you see, oh, it's coming from a white man. It must be right. Yes, this is my master. My master is the one talking. I'll give you an example. It happened to me. I'm going to mention the University of East London in 2009. I want to conduct my research in coaching and spirituality. My then supervisor, who is the head of the program, said to me, to my face, oh, we are a school of psychology. We don't believe in spirituality. Therefore, you are telling me that I cannot conduct a research in spirituality because you don't believe. So I should be limited by your ignorance of your curriculum should limit my research because you are the master. I object that. I said, if you don't believe in spirituality, that is your belief system. Why should that be imposed on my research? I'm paying for this research. But I'm able to say that because I'm by the grace of God, I've experienced spiritual emancipation that has informed my sense of self. My emancipation came from my own spiritual enlightenment when I discovered that ye are gods and the children of the Most High God. Therefore, there is no human that can define my sense of self. I am a child of God, and God is my Father and is my source. And that is liberating. So I challenged the man. I said, there is a field of psychology called transpersonal psychology that has been in existence in the 1940s. He went quiet. I said, therefore, your curriculum is deficient. The lifespan of a curriculum is 5 years. It shows that they've not been able to review that curriculum. And the module they were teaching us was on the psychology of self and others. And in their theory, in the context of the curriculum, there is no transpersonal psychology of self. These are examples of an enlightened mind because I'm enlightened. And so no white man can intimidate me because I know. So I challenge him. And then he posed a challenge to me because he knows I'm a priest. Then he said to me, oh, I give you 1 week to come and define spirituality without quoting the Bible. I don't, I could have taken that as an offense, when he said that to me, because we mentioned the Bible. Again, it shows to you that they have no regard to our indigenous identity. I'm a Christian. That is part of my identity. You see that? And a white man is telling me that come and speak to me without quoting your Bible, disregarding my spiritual identity that I subscribe to the biblical philosophy. Again, you see the imperialist mind. They always ignore your indigenous ontology, your indigenous identity. And that's the problem. I challenged him. I came back a week after and I told him that spirituality is a dimension of consciousness. He went quiet. And that was when he now said, oh, you're highly intellectual. I said, thank you for your feedback. But I don't need your validation. Because I'm not looking up to you. I've only exposed your ignorance. There's a polite way of telling somebody you are stupid.
Thank you so much for that. And we really need more African intellectuals to do this, because this is an elevated level. You don't get to this point by just telling people, hey, put that I am qualified, write that I'm qualified. Because, I think many people should pay attention to what you said before, that if you are expecting other people to validate you, they can also cancel you.
Yes.
People need to pay attention to that. And I believe that in the encounter between Europe and Africa, because people will say, why do you always make mention of that? Because we need to make mention of that. I talked a lot about storytelling. Storytelling is the most important instrument that exists. Because if we can believe it, then it can be. We can literally move a mountain if we want to and sit in another place. Because we will do that through the power of a people. But first, we need to make the people to believe that we can do that. You see, I believe that when Europeans were encountering Africa, they were in haste. First of all, there were a lot of things that happened, which of course is evident, no? That first, the idea that Africans are inferior is a recent one. Because if it were not, Christianity would not be done the way it was done. Because they basically copy a lot of things from African traditions. I think that they didn't know what was going to happen, so they were trying to gather everything, particularly the Greek. And they rewrite what they wanted, but later they saw that Africa fed actually to them, and now they need to rewrite everything, but many of the things cannot fall into place. That is why we have eco-guerrilla all the time coming up.
Let me say this to you,
please,
and to everyone listening to us. The imperialists will never see you as equal. Why? It is ingrained in their psyche, and it's also theologically erroneously engraved in their own psyche as well, that they are born to rule. It is coming from a Greek philosophy that the gods have chosen them to rule because they are superior by the virtue of the color of their skin. And therefore, my own challenge here is that Africans need to stop looking up for validation. You don't need a human being to validate you. You need God to validate you because you are a product of an intelligent designer. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And that again is liberating, no? It means now that the idea that I was having, which of course I was actually contesting at the time, is true. That I don't need to go to Saudi Arabia to go to heaven. It's not possible. I don't need to go to Vatican to go to heaven. I can go to heaven right from my village. If I were maybe somewhere in Uromi, where I was born, I grew up. That is because God is right there with me.
Woman, he said, oh, our father worship on this mountain. And Jesus said to the woman, he said, the time has come that God is a spirit. And they that will worship God, we worship in spirit and in truth. Spirit has no limitation. Spirit has no geographical limitation. Spirit exists beyond time and space. That is educational system that is decolonized. And that is what we need to understand when it comes to educational curriculum of Christian faith.
Thank you for that. You were talking about the imperialism, colonialism, and the neocolonialism, saying that in the beginning, for many imperialist Europeans, they needed to colonize the territory, the places. But now they're no longer doing that, but they are in the mind of the people to control the people. Please expand on that. That is important for us to know.
Yeah, I mean, you see from the Albach writing there, the servitude of the mind. What they did is to colonize our education and our intellectual life. And it's so powerful because once the mind is conditioned, it leads to a belief system. Now, that belief system is residing in the subconscious mind, according to psychodynamic theory of the mind. So the belief system it's there unconsciously, and it controls the life of an individual. A man or a woman can never live above their belief system. See, what colonialism and neocolonialism in educational system does is to condition a belief system that make you think inferior to the imperialists, and that everything that the imperialist is producing to you is perfect. There's nothing fault, and therefore you have nothing to contribute, and that is mind slavery.
Thank you for that. I think that is important. And there was also another point that I would like you to speak more of, where you were talking about the fact that Africans are taking on to study European system, in the form of education. And because this one we reoccurred again in one of my projects in 2015, I did a documentary. The documentary had to do with Pan-Africanism. I was trying to say, if we put what is happening in Africa in line with the idea of Pan-Africanism, we can see that it doesn't square up. So what is happening here? I take an example of what has happened in Sierra Leone, the Sierra Leone Civil War, the genocide in Rwanda, and the Nigerian Civil War, leading to the death of millions of people. These are the direct player in this war are African people. So how are we doing this to ourselves? And we also have this beautiful idea of Pan-Africanism, of African brotherhood. How brother are we really if we can do this to ourselves? And at the time, I was also talking of what was happening in Jos, central Nigeria, because then the religious conflict was going on very heavy at the time, where a lot of Nigerians, Muslims, were killing the Christians and vice versa. So therefore, I was saying, how come we have an idea that is coming from far, and for this reason, I forgot that I am a Nigerian, you are a Nigerian, so I kill you in the name of this idea that is not yours, not mine. How can we do this to ourselves, and yet we still claim to have this beautiful idea of Pan-Africanism, of being brother, of being sister? Something is happening here. It's not squaring up.
Yeah, remember we have argued in our decolonization mission that there are two elements that is needed: spiritual emancipation and intellectual emancipation. Why spiritual emancipation? Because it is the spirituality that brings us to the unity of the brotherhood. When I have spiritual discovery of my identity, I see you as my brother because we are all part of the same universal consciousness. We came from the same source. And that's why, because in spirituality, there is neither Greek nor Jew, there's neither male nor female. Why? Spirit has no gender. That is the liberating philosophy that we need.
People are not able to get to that point. Because if people are able to get to that point, most of the conflict that we are having in the world today would not exist. Take, for example, the more than 200 years or thereabout of the Crusade, where the Europeans were engaging the Arabs. What are we doing all this for? What are we doing all this for? Killing in the name of God? Now, looking at Africa, looking at the formerly colonized people that are now neo-colonized people, we're telling them that they need to abandon the neo-colonial educational system, as it were. Where should they go to when they abandon that?
Let's set this record straight. It is not abandoning the Western educational philosophy. No, it is indigenizing the concept. That is what we're talking about. We cannot sit down here and deny the human improvement that Western education and advancement and research has brought to the global scale. So, but however, importing that Western ideology and philosophy to the third world need to be indigenized. So you have to make it contextualized and make it indigenous. We cannot discard that. That is very important. Don't let us fool ourselves. If you said you want to discard that, it means you are going back in time and you'll be frozen in time and you become antiquity.
Thank you so much for that clarification. I appreciate that. Thank you. Now, what are some of the steps to be able to apply those ideology or to Western ideology in a local system.
Thank you. And that is why we talk about indigenous psychology, contextualization of the curriculum, indigenization of the curriculum. And so it is part of what we are after, our mission, our strategy at Aaron London University. To start with, we need to decolonize the teacher education curriculum. You cannot expect a colonized teacher to decolonize the curriculum. So the emancipation starts from the teacher education curriculum in the third world. So they need to be taught on how to contextualize and indigenize the curriculum to fit into the cultural and social, historical, spiritual fabric of the student in their ecosystem.
Looking at the technicality that will evolve, because that will mean shifting the mindset now, shifting the perspective of the people. But what are some of the steps to make sure that work?
Yeah, it's number one, we have to go through the political power. We have this saying in Nigeria, after God, the next power that influences your life is political power. We cannot effect this change without influencing the political power, because we need the political will that is enlightened to make the policy for indigenization of our curriculum. And Aaron London University have a beautiful curriculum. Just recently, yesterday, we got approval with a level 7 certificate in indigenous curriculum development, which we are rolling out to the African people through the embassy of the Soviet Kingdom of Hawaii in London, under the Department of Education and Research. Is our export, we are exporting that for the kingdom. That's our product we are exporting to the third world, the First Nation people. It's a skill that you have to acquire. Learning leads to acquisition of skills, and these skills to contextualize and to indigenize the curriculum has to be done through learning. Again, we need to imbibe the culture of continuous personal and professional development. That is the starting point.
Thanks so much for that. I appreciate this conversation. This is really very important, looking at the role of neocolonialism in education and how, of course, they are influencing our life and what we are doing. Because talking about education, soon you see we are talking about every other thing, from politics to economy. Everything is connected to it. No, it's not just a cerebral conversation education, but it falls into the day-to-day life of the people. Because the children that you are producing in the school are going to be the leader of tomorrow. So they're going to be the politician, they're going to be the religious leader, they're going to be the economists, they are going to basically be the player in the society. So it is not isolated argument. So I really thank you so much for this input, for this conversation. And we, of course, ask all the people that are listening to us, if you have any question, please leave it in the comment section. We will respond to you, because this is a conversation that involves everybody. It is not just for us to share with you, it's also for us to engage with you. If you feel anything, if you disagree with anything, if you believe that you have any input, please go ahead and share it in the comment section below. We love to see that, and also so that we can make more contribution, to understand also, to see if it's even resonating with you, because we want the message to resonate with you. If there is something that you feel, share with us. All right, so what would be your final thought here to conclude this conversation? Please go ahead and do that.
Yeah, I said influence is political. The most effective form of influence that leads to social change is the political will of the political leaders. So we need to influence political leadership to imbibe the concept of decolonization. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. It has been a pleasure here in this sharing this time with you, and of course bringing value to the people. And of course, this is not the last one. So we are coming again to your space, to the viewer, to bring more value to you. So thank you, everyone, and continue your search for becoming a better version of you. And of course, like I have said, there is a program that you can sign up to. It's coming. We'll let you know when it's available, probably in August, where Professor Oluwafemi is going to help you understand how to apply transpersonal psychology in your life, in your business, in your spirituality, so that you can become a better version of yourself. Because life essentially was for us to continue in improving ourselves so that we can become always a better version of ourselves. And this is very important. You don't need to attach yourself to anything for you to do that. When you were born, everything was in you. You are a full package. The entire package to become a better version of you is inside of you. So all you just need to do is to understand that so that you can begin to operate from a higher level. And this is what this program is also going to help you to understand. So that in less than 90 days, Professor Oluwafemi is going to help you uncover step by step how you will become a better version of yourself, tapping into the power of transpersonal psychology. So see you there, hopefully.